I'm Ben Smith.
I'm Max Tawney.
And this is Mixed Signals from Semaphore Media.
This week, we're sitting down with Kara Swisher, the infamous tech journalist turned podcaster.
Wait,
We'll
infamous? What do you think infamous means?
I think she's kind of infamous. I don't know, people know her.
I mean, infamous has sort of negative
Okay.
connotations.
All right. So,
Notorious?
notorious? That sounds worse to me.
No, that's bad too. Maybe just the tech journalist turned podcaster.
Yep. Okay. This week, we're sitting down with the tech journalist turned podcaster, Kara Swisher. We'll talk to her about the changing digital media business and how she actually makes money in podcasting, essentially business of being Kara Swisher.
Honestly, it is an incredible business being Kara Swisher.
Well, I guess we'll find out how good it is. We'll ask her about her finances, all of that and more after the break. So, Ben, when you and Naima were first doing the show, you discussed starting the show with the first episode with why we left the New York Times, which I don't think, did you guys end up doing that? I don't think so.
We chickened out. Yeah.
We chickened out of doing that. But, another person who also left the New York Times, along with you guys was Kara Swisher, which is pretty notable. And it was notable that several top journalists, such as yourselves, who decided to go to the Times after being in new digital media, were then a few years later deciding to leave. And I'm curious if you made that connection in your minds, if you guys discussed it together.
Yeah, I mean, there was, basically what happened was there was this explosion of new media, and people like me and Cara and you and many others went to work for these new outlets. I was at BuzzFeed. Cara started Recode. And then as the social media wave that had kind of powered these companies collapsed, lots of us sort of ran for shelter in the strongest stone building around, which was the New York Times. And so Cara wound up there, and I wound up there. Ezra Klein wound up there. And on one hand, I think this gave the Times lots of kind of digital energy and interesting stuff, but also it meant that there was a bunch of maniacs who didn't really necessarily belong at the New York Times running around making trouble. And so maybe it kind of had a time limit on it. And I think a lot of us, Corey Sika, the early Gawker blogger, is another, have since gone on our way, but remain grateful for the Times for giving us shelter in a storm.
I was asked to speak to some comms people earlier today at a big company and one of the questions that they asked me about was this idea that journalists are going to be more like creators and influencers in the way that some creators, especially like in the last election, in some ways became journalists. I think it seems like some journalists have moved more in that direction. And I think Cara seems to be kind of one of those people, right? Like she was a reporter in a very traditional newspapery sense. And now she's a podcaster who appears on events and doesn't do much writing down of words, but is clearly influential to a large segment of people who listen to the things that she has to say.
Yeah, she's a star. Although I think, remember when we had Colin Samir on, remember how they recoiled at the word journalist? So I don't know if we can still call her that or if that's offensive.
But I actually kind of think, though, too, that part of that seems to be like a business calculation that those guys have made, that branding themselves as journalists is kind of bad for booking guests. And I think it kind of scares away advertisers and gives people the wrong impression. Whereas Cara would, obviously say she's,
I'm joking. Yeah, she's obviously a journalist, but she is in some sense, a new model journalist, and what I think a lot of journalists aspire to. We can discuss for better or for worse, but really building around their own voice, their own perspective. In her case, her own decades of really hard reporting and in which she got to know all the people who now run the world in Silicon Valley.
Well, she's got a lot more experience podcasting than the two of us put together, and I think she's waiting for us. So let's bring her in.
Thank you so much for joining us, Cara.
No problem.
You have multiple successful podcasts. You talk a lot about tech, politics, and those are the obvious subjects we want to get to with you. But actually the thing that in some ways we're most interested on this show is the business of being Kara Swisher.
Oh, yes.
You've been a reporter. You've written books.
Mm-hmm.
You worked inside big organizations, started an organization, worked for the New York Times, and then decided to go out on your own. Why?
Yeah. Well, no, I did that during and between. I worked for the New York Times after I went out on my own. I was at the Post and then went to the Journal. and then went out, and then was in the journal, and then went out on my own. So it's sort of been a shifting thing throughout my career, where I go in and out of things and also do things on my own and also work for big institutions. So I think it started probably when I was at the journal, when Walt and I wanted to create something really interesting, and they were averse to interesting things at the journal at the time. Now I actually like the editor. I think she's doing some interesting stuff. But so they weren't very into our idea, and so we did it as a skunk works, and we were only allowed to do it because Walt was making so much money for the journal at the time.
But he was the tech columnist
He's a tech columnist, and
back when that was
everybody,
cool.
yeah, and everybody would, Intel or whoever would advertise, and so Walt was bringing in the dough for the journal, so he got to do what he wanted, and so they let him do what later became the Code Conference, was the All Things D conference, the D conference, and then let him do the website. But we did it internally initially because we were stupidly risk averse. We should have done it on our own, but
But just to sort of bring it to the present, and you've
Mhm.
talked about getting to your aspiration of having 0 staff.
Yes, Sap
Um,
Zero. That's
and
my book. That's going to be my next book,
y-
Sap Zero.
and
Yeah.
and I think that your career in some ways mirrors this move in media away from these big faceless institutions
Yeah, totally.
toward a realization that like most of the value for you is in being Kara Swisher,
That's
and
correct.
that's
Yeah,
it.
I think, it's funny because people like to sometimes you ever hear like you see an anonymous quote is she's just in the business of being Kara Swisher. I'm like, that's correct, you fucking idiot. It's like it's so weird for people to find that offensive in some way. And I think I've bugged you. I'm like, what are you doing in there? What are you doing in there? Why are you letting them telling you what to do? And I think it's probably born out of an idea that I really which I've talked about before, is I just don't like being an employee in the end. I don't, I always end up not liking it. And I don't like sort of consultation, and I, if I make a mistake, I kind of want to own it myself. And it's sort of a dyspeptic nature as of me, and me understanding the person I am.
But don't you think it's something about the way the media is organized now
Yes,
too, though?
yes, yeah,
That
yeah.
like
I
it's
just
made for dyspeptic entrepreneurs?
Yes, it is now. But when Walt and I started that, it was not. It was really a big deal. And we got a lot of pushback from institutions. I mean, New York Times wrote a story about how we were in the can. It just was the idea of going outside. What you wanted to be was a New York Times reporter, a Wall Street Journal reporter, a Washington Post reporter. That was the greatest thing ever. And I never bought into that. I was like, why is this the greatest thing ever? Why can't you go out on your own? I was always inspired by Walt because I thought he had a bigger brand than the journal in many ways. And so I kept thinking, what does he need them for? Right. And I was a little nobody at the time, but ultimately, what do I need that for? What am I? There was an old ad in New York when I was growing up is, I don't want to pay too much for this muffler. Do you know what I mean? Like, why do I need you? What do I need this for? And so I do that still to this day. I'm always like, what do I need you for exactly? What am I paying you for exactly? Why am I giving even my agents? I drive my agents crazy. I'm like, why am I paying you this much? I think I don't want to pay you that much. And so I think it's just it's an entrepreneurial personality. I think that everybody is moving into.
But one thing that you've talked a lot, very publicly about, how lucrative podcasting is for
It is.
you.
Hmm.
Bloomberg had a story saying that you were seeking 8 figures in your next,
Hmm.
renegotiating your next podcast deal, maybe staying with Vox, maybe going
Hmm.
elsewhere. Since this is a media show,
Be
I'm really
happy to tell
curious.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm
My
curious.
last
Break it down a
deal.
little bit.
Here's the thing. My last deal was 8 figures. I'm sorry to tell you. Like I already that was such a dopey article. I kept saying my last deal was 8 figures. You know what I mean? And the deals between Pivot and On were very different, right? So the Pivot deal was a certain guarantee, which was about what my salary, a very strong salary would be, essentially for a reporter. And then over the course of so many years, the way the Pivot one was done is we got stock in Vox that then was convertible to cash at the end of the deal. And it was at a certain figure. It was a put, I guess. I'm not Scott sort of dreamed it up. So at the end of the deal, Vox, which is very soon, Vox has to hand over a giant sum of money to us, right? And
Mhm.
How
and we
much?
a lot, a lot, a lot. Eight
Come on.
figures, 8 figures.
High 8, low 8,
A nice 8 figure
mid
deal.
8.
No, not $50 million.
Yeah.
No, no, no. It's like $20 million. It's something
Yeah.
like that. But we have it
Appreciate
worked
your kind of
out. No
millennial level
problem.
salary
Yeah, yeah,
transparency,
yeah.
Kara.
It's $20 million. Yes, right. Yes, and that means it was $2.5 million every year. For each.
And that's on top of all the other ways you make money. Like,
That's
what was
correct.
the
That's
what did
correct.
Kara Swisher Inc. bring in 2024?
Millions of dollars for me. Millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Many, many
But
millions
like,
of dollars.
how does it? So, how much of it is from like podcasting versus any sort of like event stuff that you're doing? Like,
Yeah.
what does the pie look like?
Well, it depends. See, back in the day, the event business used to make me at least a million or so a year, right? That was usually it could be more depending on the year, but it was anywhere between a million and $2 million. That was, and Walt and I would each get that. And that was every year. That went on for a long time. That's not, I don't do those anymore. There's some speaking money that's not that big. It depends on when I want to do it and stuff like that. And I tend to turn down a lot of stuff. Now with the on deal, one of the things that I wanted to change it because I wanted the incentives to be in the right place, right? So that everybody makes money and everyone feels good about it. So on that deal, we had a minimum guarantee, which was small. It was the same one as Pivot, essentially. And then we took the costs of the production. They have the producers working for them, and there's a certain salary costs, and I think it's times 1.3 or something like that. And I can make that bigger or smaller depending on what we need. So we both share the costs. We split those in half, and then whatever we make is we split with each other. That to me is a perfect deal because then it's a question of what the split is. And that's been changing a lot for Scott and I, for example, because some of the splits are 50-50, some of them are 60-40, some of them are 70-30. They're moving
Is Scott's
towards
value like relatively going up here? Is that what's happening?
we're together. I think we're together.
Okay.
So
Oh, you share
yes,
that split.
we
He's
share
not
that.
taking a higher percentage.
No. Oh, are you kidding? Are you
Okay.
kidding? I naivete. No, 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 no. No,
So,
we don't do
so
that. No,
I have
no.
to say, like, as a, like a lot of journalists, myself included, like
Mhm.
this stuff makes me a little uncomfortable talking
Why?
publicly about
Why?
about money, about how you make
All
money in
you guys are all
journalism.
trying to dig of everyone else's salaries. Why are you uncomfortable?
Why, I don't know, but like I sort of now have this image of you and your kids just like sitting in your home with gold ducats, like throwing them
Yes,
around
that's
like
it.
Scrooge
Gold
McDuck.
ducats. No, you know what? I spend everything on Thomas the Tank Engine trains. I got a lot of mouths to feed, Ben.
No, but obviously, I mean, no, obviously, I think none of us genuinely got into this thinking this is the best way to make money. But I am curious, like, why are you so focused on it? Like, why do you care this much about how much money you make?
I don't care about how much money I make. I just care about that I do really great work. And if I make a lot of money, why should I hand it over to other people who didn't think of it? I don't think
Uh-huh.
that's care about money. I don't consider reporting like a priesthood or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a business, like show business. It's like any business. And so I think what reporters do, and some of them put so much value and they don't get anything for it. And money is just the expression of that, right? Maybe they get fame or a Pulitzer Prize. If that's what they want, go for it, right? But I don't think there's anything wrong. I think one of the big problems with media is reporters pretend that it's not a business or they don't know how it works. And the thing I had right from the beginning when I was at the Washington Post was I covered retail, which was the lifeblood of the Washington Post, right? And so I covered
Yeah.
the decline of retail. And I was watching as the economic underpinnings of both two things. I was covering the internet, so subscription business was under real pressure. So I had to learn about that business, right? And then once I learned about it, I was like, oh no, the Post is screwed. Same thing with retail ad sales, display ad sales. Oh no, and classified, another thing that got hit by digital. And so I was very cognizant of the business. And so I think it's very important for reporters to understand how things are paid for so they can make a business that is sustainable. And even if it doesn't make a ton of money, if it's like, look, a Casey Newton, someone I think I helped inspire to go do what he's doing. I know I did. And, I felt like he could make money on his own and now he has a salary that's terrific because he made it, right? And I don't think that's why do I care about it is if I make the cake, I would like to be paid for the cake I make kind of thing. And I don't think that's distasteful. Maybe rich kids like yourself can say that, but
Haha, there you go. Stick in the knife. I was just thinking how I'm sad that I never got to like work with you when you were like an absolutely terrifying young reporter.
yeah, I was terrifying. But I remember having, several different people I've worked for. It's like, but you get to work for the Washington Post / New York Times / Wall Street Journal. And I'm like, Yeah, give me the money. Like, I'm sorry, like,
Can't eat prestige.
or remember when they tried to get you not into the union by giving you a title? Do you remember that trick they used to have? Special correspondent was one that the Journal had one time. They're like, "We'd like to give you this title," and I'm like, "That would get me out of the union, and therefore you could fire me when you needed to. So I think I'm gonna be special only to
Yeah,
my
I had
children."
one of those deals at the Times and wasn't in the union, and I tried to get into the union. I called up the union guy, but I think they thought because I was writing about media that I was a spy, and they never
Oh, you
called me
probably were,
back.
though. You
So,
probably
yeah,
were.
so
Yeah,
I
I
saved
think
on the
that
union dues.
they were fairly skeptical.
Mhm.
Well, we talk a lot about on the show about changing media landscape, the move from traditional media, TV, newspapers to digital media, podcasts such as yours. But it kind of seems like now we're in this moment of convergence between the two of them, right? Spotify is trying to make everybody do video. TV
Mhm.
networks want to maybe put podcasts on TV.
They
Is
do.
is podcasting becoming TV?
A little bit. A little bit. One of the things I think I've been good at is anticipating, right? I started doing podcasting 10 years ago. And I don't mind it's converging. It's just a natural extension of where it's going. And someone like Howard Stern, I thought was a podcaster in a weird way, and then they had the video of it. Same thing with Joe Rogan. I don't quite understand why people want to watch this because I don't think it's particularly compelling, but if they want it, what's the difference? What do you care how they watch or listen to it?
But do you think that the natural trajectory for Pivot, say, is that CNN buys it and it fills an hour on their shelf?
Could be. I mean, but why should they have to buy it? Why don't we just license it? Why don't we do a I would never sell it. I would never sell it. I don't actually own it. Vox owns the Pivot brand, but we own the Kara Scott.
Right, but you would license it to them.
Yes, they licensing would be the deal I would think about doing with them.
And with
Yes.
CNN, you think? Is that the likeliest home?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I have a deal with them now. That would be the one I would look at first. Why not? Like they know video. I don't really want to hire a bunch of cameras. They have them. It could be interesting. That could be. It's so funny. I wonder if we're ever talking to them about that. Anyway,
Yeah, okay, I think Mark listens to the show sometimes, so,
yeah, that meeting's already occurring, Ben.
Okay, it's a scoop, all right.
Yeah,
As,
that's not really a
Swisher
scoop.
meeting
Nobody
with my
cares. Nobody gives a
that's the
fuck.
problem with media scoops.
Clearly, they do. It's in Bloomberg,
Oh, whatever. That was
leading the
ridiculous.
newsletter.
Oh, come on. Stop it. It's
But just
ridiculous.
to go back, I mean, it is true, you were ahead on this, you predicted a lot of it. What's
Mhm.
next?
Well, I think about it a lot because we're doing this new podcast deal. So we talk to everybody, which is just always interesting to me. I like meeting with everybody, like the most unlikely people too, because everyone's got a really interesting idea. And so often they're sort of a chapter behind us in some ways. One of the things that Scott and I think about, I mean, we each own all our properties. We are the actual owners of the IP. That was one of the things I think I did very smartly with On. I was mostly it was born out of annoyance that Walt and I created all this wonderful material that Rupert owns, or we created stuff that Vox owns. And I was like, that's enough. Even if I don't do anything with it, I'd like to own it, right? It's just mine, so I can decide what to do with it. Also, a lot of what I created for the Wall Street Journal, they lost in yet another one of their redoing of their information systems, like the Will Lewis thing. Suddenly, it
Huh.
disappeared. All this video of early internet
Probably
people.
equally compromising, honestly.
I don't. No comment. Oops! I pushed the. I was like, remember the woman, the Nixon secretary, who
Yeah,
was
yeah,
trying to.
exactly.
That's what it feels like. Yeah, I did it by accident with my foot here. Whatever. Whatever. Well, sure. Whatever. You got out of it anyway. Um, but one of the things that's important to us is owning it, and therefore we can do whatever we want with it. And so, what do you then do with that IP? And to me, we have to sort of decide as a media person. Now, I'm different. Like we had a lot of people come to us and said, "Let's create another new media company." We had several people, actually heads of advertising at some of these big media organizations that want to break out. And they were like, let's create this and do events and do this. And Scott and I were like, oh, no, thank you. We've done that. Right. But that's where I am in my cycle. If you were a younger person, I might do that again, but I already did it with Walt. I did it, after Walt left. And so one of the things that's important for Scott and I, for example, to think about is what do we want to spend our days doing and how do we want to do it and what do we not want to do? And so one of the, like I think like Ben Thompson at Stratechery probably has the greatest life. He clearly makes bank with that thing. He enjoys lording it over people because he's smarter than most people, right? I don't agree with him on everything, but boy,
He
is he
lives
good
in
at what he does.
Taiwan.
Lives in whatever. Like he gets to do what he wants, and he's probably making a nice little living doing it. And he gets a certain level of impact, which he absolutely has by
Yeah.
not having to affiliate. So, what you have to think about as a media personality, if you're talented enough, is what you want to do that you like to do every day and where you want to do it from, right?
Can I ask, as you're
Sure.
doing these, as you've been
Mhm.
having these meetings, what's the sense that you get about the different strategies or directions that some of these companies are going, if you don't mind me asking?
No, not at all.
Because what they're saying to you obviously says something about what their general
Yeah.
direction is.
Yeah, I think often they have the same idea, right? And it's not a fresh one. Like so that's one of the things. It's like I've heard just 2 or 3 ideas that I'm like, "That's interesting," right? That's kind of interesting.
What were the ideas?
So, why don't you take it and make it, a lot of them are do it as a streamer. A lot of them do it as a
Mm,
streaming video thing, which I get. That doesn't seem to be the hardest lift to try to think about. The other one is cut it up into bits and then sell it into pieces, which I wouldn't do, but I thought it was interesting. Like, how do you cut up a pivot or whatever you're making and cut it into pieces? What is the digital element to it, to a pivot? What would a pivot newsletter look like, right? Does it have to be print? There's so many newsletters out there. What could be delivered to people? Stuff like that. A lot of it, I'm like, I'm too fucking exhausted to do that. I don't want to do that. I want to keep it simple, kind of, keep it simple, stupid kind of thing. I think everybody sort of wants to say podcast, but they don't want to actually make the commitment to it.
mm,
One of the things I'm interested in, this was my idea, not theirs, was this federation of people that have a lot of interest. And I'm not talking about a Substack. It's like, what do like the right wing media does this really well. They collect with each other and trade podcasts, they trade guests speaking. They have a whole
Uh-huh.
ecosystem that works really well. The
Yeah.
center left doesn't have that. Like, what does it look like where you're not necessarily, they tend to want to buy you versus partner with you, right? And why couldn't you partner with one person and then another and then another? Like, why does it have to be a purchase?
It's been interesting. I've been thinking about a lot about that idea since the election because that's something that a lot of people have been talking about. And I think it's true, but I think it's also organic. Like I think a lot of
Mhm.
these people both love and hate each other are deeply in community together. Like it's the kind of people they're always hanging out together at CPAC and along the sides of these
Yeah.
other things. So I think it's totally true that
It
they're much
is,
better
but
at
they
building
do.
this.
I've tracked them very carefully because I'm watching how they do it, and it's really interesting. Like, why isn't there a version of that? Why isn't there an industrialization of podcasts? And I don't mean Spotify paying too much money for things. I'm talking about there's certain things you need in podcasts. You need video capabilities, more marketing capabilities, advertising capabilities. Where's the industrialization of that? Where you don't have to be in one place, but that you have services. Where's
Yeah, and on the
that?
right, actually, Chris Balfe at
Mhm.
Red Seat has like done that,
That's
I
right.
think,
That's
basically. And
correct.
you're
They
right that
have.
there's no, yeah.
And they are also on each other. So they're all echoing each other in a lot of ways, but they're not they're the other thing I'm finding interesting is I've gotten a lot of the spreadsheets for a lot of those companies, which is interesting to me. Some of them are spending a lot of money but not making a lot of money, surprising.
Ooh, I
Um,
remember about that. That's not a good way to go.
no,
Turns
exactly.
out.
They're making 10 and they're spending 12, right?
Yeah,
Or
that's
something
the
like
old
that.
model. That's the 2010s.
So one of the things that's interesting to me is like a company like Ben Shapiro's. I'm really interested in that company only because I'm just interested in what he's doing, like selling his razors, where his e-commerce. And of course, everyone would scoff at that because it sounds very Alex Jones, right? Like, oh, he's selling selenium, whatever the fuck that guy's selling. But I was like, he's doing woke razors. I had this argument with someone, like he's doing whatever Jerry's razors or whatever. My whole thing is, are they good razors? Or not. Like one of the things that drives me crazy is so someone was like, "Oh, they're terrible. They're doing that." I'm like, "Why?" Patagonia sells on its liberal
Do
fleece.
you and Scott have any like kind
No,
of
not yet,
breakout
but I
merch
was thinking
ideas?
of it. What
What would you
would it
sell?
be? I don't know. We got some
Honestly,
some
Scott could totally
ideas.
sell supplements, all the young men
Correct. He
stuff,
could. That's right. All the young men, the
like
balding
male
stuff.
vitality, whatever, off-brand Viagra.
But I instead of dismissing what Ben Shapiro was doing, I'm like, is it a good product? And what's the fucking difference if he wants to sell it as anti-woke or not? Why are you offended if the liberals do it too? Like, that's fine as long as it's a good product and you're meeting the needs of your audience. That to me is interesting. We don't have a commerce thing. I just was thinking
To
about it.
get back to the topic though
Hmm.
of the business of Cara, one of the things
Hmm.
that you've talked very publicly about
Mhm.
is your desire to buy the
The
Washington
Washington
Post, which
Post,
was
yes.
yeah, which was
Yeah.
your home for a long time, and helped
Short time.
long time ago, but helped to
Yes.
maybe kickstart your career. I'm curious. You've talked about it. Do you get the sense that there's any actual interest from Jeff Bezos?
I do get the sense there's no actual interest from Jeff Bezos. I do. I think two things I wanted to do. One is, I don't know why, like a lot of the media was like, oh, that can't happen. I'm like, well, why? This is what they did when I started podcasts. This is what they did when I started live events. This is what they did when we started All Things D. Well, you can't do that. I'm like, can't I? Why can't I? I can get the money. There's no, if you can get the money, Ben, I certainly can get the fucking money, right? It's not that much money.
True,
It's not
true.
that much
Probably on
money
better
at all.
terms.
Probably exactly. And I have some ideas of how it could be done and in different structures and everything else. And so
But he's not
I
he's
think,
not taking your calls.
well, a little bit. Like we talked to Expedition. We've talked to Expedition people, which is the investment arm of him. And they've been non-committal, I would say, but not calling back, like that kind of thing.
Don't you think it's inevitable? Do you think it's inevitable that he sells it in the next 5
I
years?
would like him to think about it. That's so. So one of the things Scott and I argue about, he's like, "Oh, you've got to go behind the scenes and be all tricky." I'm like, I don't do behind the scenes very well. So what's wrong with in front of the scenes? Everything I do is in front of the scenes. And so why not express I want to buy? What's the big fucking secret? Like, I want to buy it. I could probably raise the money relatively easily. I have some ideas about structure. What's the difference? And one of the things that I think is important to get going, and maybe someone else will get it, is let's talk about the ownership by this guy. Should he be the one to own it? Now, he can have it because he's rich and he just wants to have it. But I'd like him to at least think for 5 seconds, why do I now have this thing? I maybe back in 2013, it made sense, although he got a pretty good deal, honestly. It wasn't like it was that much of a favor for him to buy it. Is he the right owner for today? I think is a good question to ask. And the more I cause attention to that, it gets a lot of people thinking about the ownership of all these things. Is he the best owner for what I consider a national treasure?
I mean, I do think the way in which they screwed up the endorsements and pulled it back at the
Hmm.
last minute
What a
looked,
mess, huh?
as he wrote in his own thing, everybody's going to interpret this as sort of a craven political move. And in fact, everybody did. And it actually, it made me think of your other former boss, who you refer to
Hmm.
as Uncle Satan, Rupert
Oh,
Murdoch, who
who very
who
good at media.
it's interesting. I wrote this on Sunday, but I do think that in this moment, when you see particularly Bezos and Patrick Soon-Shiong
Hmm.
frantically trying to wriggle out of Trump's line of fire,
Hmm.
um, and change endorsements and appoint conservative columnists and whatever it
Hmm.
takes just to not have,
Hmm.
Murdoch is right in Trump's grill. Like if you read the editorial page of the Wall Street
Absolutely.
Journal, you're gonna over the last
Hmm.
couple weeks, you will see the clearest and sharpest criticism of the
Correct.
Trump family's sort of cash grab, of
Hmm.
kind of violations of the rule of law. You'll see, as clear as in any other publication. And there's
I
something
would
about
agree.
Murdoch who obviously has this complex relationship with Trump and with politics, but he seems to understand that being a publisher and retaining that power, it's not just about flattering powerful people and being afraid of them.
No.
There's something
I
else
think he's
going
an
on, right?
I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think he's a very good media owner. I think he really I don't like his Fox News, obviously, or what he's doing there, largely because he's warped my mother's brain. But one of the things I always thought about him when Walt and I used to go see him quite a bit and have lunch with him and stuff like that is this guy loves media, right? He'd be there with a pen and circling things. And I know that sounds kind of quaint, but I loved it. He was like, why is this here? Why is this written here? This is boring. Like he used to, like, he literally loves the media. And
You
so
didn't call him Uncle Satan back then, did you?
I did, but he didn't
But
hear it. So
not to
he
his
didn't hear.
face. You weren't like, more sugar, please, Uncle Satan.
Well, I did call, what's his name? The one who died, Jabba the Hutt to his face. Because I went,
Roger
oh, Jabba
Ailes.
the Hutt. Yeah, he did. He heard me. Unfortunately, his hearing was better. Because there were these dining rooms at News Corp that you would all go to. Do you remember? Do you ever go to those? They had
Yeah, I have.
individual dining rooms, and so he was in one, and he'd gotten quite a large man. He was a large man, and when I saw him, I thought he was brilliant. FYI, I have to say, whether evil is another debate, but brilliant about media. And I saw him. Crossing into a dining room. We were going to have dinner, had lunch with Rupert, and I went, and Walt's like, "What?" Because I to see him in the flesh was like, and he had a lot of flesh happening, and I went, "Huh." Jabba the Hutt. And then he goes, what? What did you say? And I ran. And he goes, what's your name? I went, Barbara. And I kept going. And then I slammed myself, and Walt and I hid behind a door. But I did say Jabba the Hutt to Walt. You can ask him. It was funny. Anyway. Well, anyway, Rupert's a very good media owner. Let me just say, I would rather deal with him than a lot of than these tech billionaires who I think are cloddish, incompetent, and don't know what they're doing, like at all. Really quite cloddish. And Rupert was not cloddish for sure.
Well, this seems like a good place to take a break, so we'll be right back after this.
This week on our branded segment from Think with Google, I spoke with Google's VP of Marketing, Josh Spanier, about how AI is creating a new era for agencies. So AI has just massively disrupted the marketing industry, and I'm curious how it's changing the value of agencies, the relationships between brands and agencies as it kind of sweeps through the whole space.
So a guilty pleasure in the marketing industry, under the hood, has been the vitriol, the drama, the egos, and the interplay between the big creative agencies, the big holding companies, these big conglomerates. They all hate each other, and it's delicious drama for the last 40 or 50 years. And yet, over the last sort of 10 to 15 years, as the digital revolution has happened, these big holding companies, these big agencies, maybe haven't been as relevant as they used to be. Back in the days of Mad Men, the TV show, it was all about it in the plots of that TV show. Today, maybe not. And what's really interesting about AI is it's given, I think, a new lease of life, an adrenaline shot to a lot of these companies. They've made massive investments in technology. They've created products and services that clients can really use in an AI-first world. So we work with Group M, which is a large conglomerate, part of WPP, and they've invented their new technology layer they call Open. It's all built on Google's Gemini, which is great. So it can actually take the creative process, the ideation process, the strategy process, and bring it all together. So we are building campaigns in a fraction of the time, but working with the agency, working with the Group M and WPP creatives to actually get to better ideas faster and more seamlessly. And it's actually given a more relevant place for these agencies where previously perhaps they were losing some oomph in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think we used to cover them a lot. I feel like maybe they'll become fun to cover again.
Yeah, well, there was this merger announced at the end of last year between Omnicom and IPG, and there's been a lot of debate about it. But 10 years ago, when this was first, it was front page news for the Wall Street Journal. This time around, less so. But this AI transformation is changing how the agencies think about who they hire, what skills they bring to the table. But it's absolutely giving them a relevancy. And we're really excited to partner with these really smart, progressive agencies who are actually helping us do better work. And I think a lot of brands are seeing that.
I've been struggling to get interviews with those agency heads. So if you're listening, Mark Reed, Dr. Sadoun, call me. Where can people find out more about this?
You can sign up for the Think with Google newsletter, and it comes out once a week, and it often contains great examples of work done with partner agencies and brands.
Second best media newsletter around.
Absolutely.
All right.
Brings us back to where we started. We talked about your business, and in how you mentioned kind of mentoring some other folks like Casey Newton, folks who encouraging them to kind of take the plunge and go out on their own. But I guess I'm really curious. Do you think that other journalists can kind of do what you've done, or is it difficult to replicate? No, you don't think so. You don't think it's a model. all of these, a lot of the big name voices who had columns or or newsletters. Yeah, no, but actually many of the new ones are doing. I mean, have found that they have an audience. I mean, this is a flawed example, but some of them. But if you look, like, even, this was, people were laughing about it online, but Jennifer Rubin got 10,000 paid subscribers on Substack in her first 12 hours.
I'll
So
tell you
it's
why.
amazing.
You don't know this, but at the Washington Post, she was the number one referrer. She was the one everybody was always number one. So I could see that because everybody wants the brand of, like, I don't love all her stuff. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I'm like, oh, guess what she's going to say. But her fans love her, right? Her fans want more of that. One of the things with her is she was producing too much stuff for the Post, but now she's not. She's feeding an audience, and that to me again goes to the product you're selling. And you don't judge it. It doesn't. It's not for you. Like, neither is Joe Rogan. It's not for me. It's for them. And so you can sit around all day you want and say that sucks. It's like, well, it doesn't suck to the people who like it. And as long as you have that promise, and then some people come to me, and I'm not going to say who it is. There's several, like, well-known names. They're like, I want to start a media company. I'm like, no, not you. Stay at your job, retire. And there was someone recently, and they're like, Cara, and I'm like, there's no way you're fucking going to get up in the middle of the night. You're not going to, no. Stay with the town cars. As long as you fucking can have that town car, stay with it and keep going.
Did Ben ask you before he said that 270 million Americans were gonna English
yeah.
speakers were gonna?
Yeah, that's right.
Did you advise him to stay put and enjoy the
No,
media
he's an
column and play
entrepreneur.
tennis?
No,
No,
Cara
but
was
you-
always pushing for.
I was pushing because
Making
I think
trouble.
he has an entrepreneurial sense, and not everyone at the Times does, as you know, Ben. Right? That wouldn't you keep some of them there? Like, just stay there. Just
Yeah, and lots of great
stay.
journalists. Like, it's sort of a person. Like, it's maybe
Yeah.
sometimes a flaw to get distracted by all this entrepreneurial stuff. You ought to be reporting stories. And
I happen to
don't think
enjoy
it's-
the business. I enjoy
Yeah,
the
me too.
business part of it. Yeah, a lot, actually.
Yeah, I say half-heartedly. I enjoy the business too. You really enjoy it.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. I think it's interesting. I think and again, getting back to the money, you're saying, why do I care? Because I made it. Like, why shouldn't I? Like, I think
Yeah.
you never ask that of a man, but that's okay. I'll let you do it. But it's like, I
Oh,
like to,
I
you
would
would
ask
not.
it of a man
It's
if he was to
easier. Yes,
I feel like men
but-
are more bashful. I don't know. I just don't know other people in media who like talk so openly about the money they make and how they make it. It's interesting. I think
Well, you asked me, and I'm answering a question.
I
Why
know,
should
but
I
I'm
be
saying
coy?
I think I would certainly ask a man about his Scrooge McDuck.
Right,
ducats
but
if that
you,
was-
but
if-
let
if
me
he
just
left
say, I
himself
don't.
open to it.
What I think is happening, and this is a really important thing in media. The same thing with it has the through line between the Post thing and this stuff I'm doing is, what's the fucking secret? Like, I don't understand. Why do I have to keep it? Why do I have to, like? It's not that complex what I'm doing. I'm making a product and I'm selling it to people, and this is how I make it, and this is how we get paid. We're making this much in advertising. We're making this much, and if you want to know about it, like, we have this amazing new thing with Johns Hopkins. It's a live event series that we get paid for. We don't have any costs. And then they get what they want, which is a great live event at their facility in Washington. I then put it on the podcast and sell advertising as it. Why is that a secret? Like, and it's really,
Right.
it's a really good thing for everybody. And the question I asked, I was with someone from the Washington Post. They're like, that's really cool. I'm like, why didn't you do it? Like, it would seem like you would be a better partner than I am, but here I am taking the money that was probably you could have had if you had been a little more creative. That's all.
When you're running the Washington Post, it's gonna be fun to
Oh,
watch.
I have so many ideas. I'm going to broadcast. Scott, that fucking asshole. He's like, media's not interesting. I'm like, there's a million fictional TV shows about media that have been big hits, right? There's a zillion of them, right? Media is interesting. I would broadcast everything that in the meetings, when Will was like yelling at the lady reporters, that one. What a stupid thing to do, by the way. I would broadcast everything so everyone could see
The
what
lawyers,
you were doing.
the lawyers they're rolling
no,
over.
they wouldn't. Why? What's there to hide?
They can do that live too.
Yeah.
Live, everything live. Here's what we're making. This is what we lost. This is what.
Yeah.
Why not make it interesting to people? Make our story interesting to people. I would also give reporters shares. I would keep them informed. Like, that's the thing. All this, they keep us stupid in secrecy, and it's not my nature to be secret. Like, unless it's like a personal thing, like, okay, keep personal, like weird personal, but there's a lot that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. I got to the Times after they had killed the public editor, and I just found that people loved reading about the New York Times. Like, they'd given up so much traffic by getting rid of their public editor. Whenever I wrote about the New York Times, it was the most read thing.
Was it Liz Spade? Was that the Liz Spade one?
Yeah, she was the final one. But there is
Yeah.
it's funny. I mean, it's a strange thing, but it is true that our
Mhm.
readers sometimes are very interested in us, which I would say on a podcast about the media.
I think
Um,
it's great. It employs me. That is the job that employs me. So I
Any
appreciate that
business
audience.
any business is interesting, and the struggle is
yeah.
interesting too, right? The struggle is interesting. Like, so how do you figure out new
I
ways?
mean, in a way that part of the business of media, just as you say this, I think it's always partly been mystery and mystique, and that like bringing like iPhone cameras behind the scenes at Vogue would just like totally spoil everything.
Not
Like,
anymore.
yeah, maybe not anymore, but I do
There's
think
no
that part of the
mystique.
reason that people are so reluctant to this idea is there used to be a kind of mystery and a
Yeah,
man
but
behind
that's
the
like
curtain.
back in the day when you were all
Yeah.
drinking bourbon, which I never experienced. But like, I think it is interesting. And also, it's not a very good business, is it? It's not the best business. Although now AI has just gotten
It can
supplanted
be.
by
I think
AI.
what you and I both found in our careers, it can be a pretty good business if you work
Yes,
incredibly hard and execute well,
that's
but it's never going
correct.
to be Google.
Right, right. That was the big secret to all these moguls. They're like, we're gonna out media you. I'm like, one, it's hard. Two, it's not a very good business.
Yeah, and
Shh.
then it kind of stays hard. Like it's hard, and then
It's
we were
hard.
talking to our
It's not
great
fun.
CFO who's done stuff in tech at some point early on in
Yeah.
Semaphore. He was like, "Oh, so you just have to work really hard, and then you can build a decent business and have decent margins, and then you just keep working hard, right? Like that's the deal.
Yes.
Like there's
Yeah.
not a moment when it
Yeah.
kind of turns
Yeah.
into a tech business and scales like that."
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm trying. I love TV right now for some reason. I'm fascinated with TV. That's the other thing is everyone's like, "Why are you doing this?" I'm like, I don't know. I
It's
just have
all
this.
becoming TV. Here we are. Are we on
I
TV now?
just am
Maybe we
interested in
are.
it. Barry Diller, who I think is one of the greatest media thing. I have to
Yeah.
say, I love talking to him about everything. He and I had this really interesting discussion recently about the industrialization of all this, which he knows a lot about, of course. And one of the things he said to me in an interview was like, he was talking about the death of TV. He's like, how can a worldwide distribution network of video ever be anything but a good business? Like, how could you not turn it into a good business? Oh, my kids are here now. Hello.
Perhaps this is our cue to let
Yeah.
you go, Kara.
Yeah.
You
Yes.
have more
There
important
she
things to
is.
do.
Hello. How you doing? Yeah, see, I'm here with my kids spending our gold ducats. Do you have our gold ducats, sweetie? And she's
Thank
like,
you so much
what?
for coming on, Kara. Thank you
All
for
right.
joining us.
Yeah,
Okay.
we really appreciate it. This was so fun. So Ben, the business of being Cara seems to be great. There's mid eight figure deals.
She's getting paid out $20 million, I think, this year.
Yeah,
Good
it's
year.
pretty good. Yeah, pretty good. What do you think about her message though, which is that not very many people can do this, and that it's not maybe necessarily a sign of the future, but maybe has more to say about Cara and a few other kind of people.
Yeah, I mean, one of the great things about Kara Swisher is you don't get any false modesty from Kara Swisher. And I think she like is incredibly confident in her own abilities and also does see the extent to which her, among other things, just ridiculous work ethic is part of making that kind of life in media work, and that being out on your own is incredibly hard work. I mean, I guess in a way the thing that she said that worried me most was, because I think it's probably true, like lots of people who are in media, who are in journalism, who are in production of various kinds, like don't want to be entrepreneurs. We can get into this because we wanted to be entrepreneurs. Like if we wanted to be entrepreneurs, we would have started like HVAC businesses. And so as she says, so like you should stay in this big institution, but I don't know, these big institutions are really in trouble, and the big institutions actually, even as we say, well, if some people ought to be in these big institutions, the big institutions are like looking at Kara Swisher and saying, we want more of that and less of the sort of rank and file. And I think it's a real tension.
Yeah, that's true. The other thing that she mentioned that I think is interesting, and this is a conversation that has seemed to be coming up a little bit more with, among people in Kara's kind of cohort on the center left, is this idea, of building this kind of network and having these network and community effects, between podcasters and building something very similar to the manosphere. I'm curious if you thought that was a smart and interesting observation, or if that's just these things are. I'm a little bit. I mean, to kind of lay out my cards here, I think I'm a little skeptical of this idea. I think that the right has been better at building community and has been less shy about marketing and monetizing that stuff through brand partnerships and whatnot. But I'm curious what you think.
I mean, you cover the people who I think have been trying to, and I know there are efforts on the left to sort of recreate that world. And I think they were sort of ineffective efforts on the left to build up new networks of TikTok creators and stuff who love Kamala Harris. And I don't know. I mean, I think there's real money going into that, right? But maybe nobody wants it. Or maybe the thing we're talking about is called the New York Times op-ed page.
Yeah, I mean that's ultimately always been what it is that those there's not as much of an audience for it as there is on the right, because most liberal and center left people are pretty satisfied with their experience of reading New York Times opinion and listening to the Ezra Klein show and the Daily and whatnot. Well, that's it for us this week. Thank you so much for listening to Mixed Signals from Semaphore Media. Our show is produced by Sheena Ozaki, with special thanks to Max Toomey, Britta Galanis, Chad Lewis, Rachel Oppenheim, Anna Pizzino, Garrett Wiley, Jules Zern, and Tori Kaur. Our engineer is Rick Kwan, and our theme music is by Billy Libby. Our public editor this week is Jeff Bezos, whose people are returning Kara Swisher's calls somewhat surprisingly.
Wish they'd return our calls. If you like Mixed Signals, please follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Please feel free to review us.
And if you still want more from Semaphore Media, you can always sign up for the Semaphore Media newsletter, publishing every Sunday night.